Good evening. My name is Dr. James Anderson. I'm currently the president of the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. And tonight we're going to have a lecture entitled National Readiness for Great Power Competition. And thank you for joining this virtual event. For those of you who don't know, the Institute of World Politics, IWP, is a graduate school in national security, international affairs, national security, and intelligence. We have a total of 5 master's degrees. We have a doctoral program. We have 18 certificate programs, and we have 2 new online master's programs. If you're interested in learning more about IWP, please visit us at iwp.edu. Tonight's event is the 24th annual Pearl Harbor Day lecture. Pearl Harbor actually occurred on, of course, December 7th. But we are, every year we commemorate that event and have an event that reminds Americans of the importance of defense readiness and preparedness. And to help us tonight, I am delighted to introduce our featured guest speaker. General Joe Votel is a retired 4-star general, United States Army, who had a distinguished 39-year career in the service of our country. And he had many important assignments, serving at every level of command, both conventional military forces and also special operations forces, including combat tours in Panama, Afghanistan, and Iraq. He was the commanding general for U.S. Special Operations Command in 2014, and then from 2016 to 2019, he served as the commander of United States Central Command. In that capacity, he notably led a nearly 80-member coalition force that ended up crushing ISIS and liberating Iraq and Syria from that group. He has received many awards during the course of his illustrious career, and in his retirement, he's been very active and remains engaged in national security affairs. He is currently serving as the president and CEO for the Business Executives of National Security, BENS, located here in Washington, D.C. He's also a non-resident fellow at the JFK School of Government in Boston. And he also serves on several boards of directors, and he is an advisor to the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. General Votel is a 1980 graduate of West Point, and he holds master's degrees from both the Command and Staff College and also the Army War College. And General, it's an absolute delight to have you on board tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to you for any opening remarks that you may have. And then I have a series of questions that we can dialogue on. And then later in the evening, we'll have some questions from our attendees. So, General, over to you.
Thanks, James. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate the invitation to come and talk with your students and talk with the members of the IWP here. I really do appreciate opportunities like this, and so when this was offered to me, I wanted to jump after it. Trying to understand exactly what IWP does is not very hard. The focus on developing skills and in applying the instruments of statecraft, I think, is an extraordinarily important one for our country. And my hat's off to all of your students and your faculty for the work that you're doing. I can't think of a more important time when develop skills in these areas could be so critical to the security of our nation. So I'm very, very glad to be with you tonight. And I also note the significance of the Pearl Harbor anniversary here as we get ready to do that in the next day or so. And certainly, I think that's a reminder of the importance of readiness, the importance of thinking ahead, the importance of being prepared beforehand. The Pearl Harbor, like 9/11, like some other events we've had in our past, certainly were strategic setbacks for us, with which we had to respond. And I think the idea is to minimize those, and certainly the work of IWP is designed to do that. So it's great to be with you tonight, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. And with that, why don't we just jump right in and turn our attention to some issues in the Indo-Pacific region, and in particular, some of the concerns that we have about China and China's rise, and what China is doing, and on a variety of fronts. And this, of course, is something that has occurred over a trajectory that has occurred over quite some time. Post 9/11, Americans were rightly and justifiably focused on counterterrorism for a number of years, and we've had, thanks to your leadership and the leadership of others, had some success in attacking those terrorist groups that have an extended reach. But kind of in that time frame, China has continued to develop its capabilities on a lot of different fronts, as you know well. And for starters, I just would be interested in your opinion. When you look at the Chinese capabilities, of course, they extend beyond the military, but just starting with their military developments in the Indo-Pacific region, what are some of the things that concern you the most, and that we should be following?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a great place to start. It certainly is, China certainly is a threat in the Indo-Pacific region, but its reach is much further than the Indo-Pacific region, as many of you are aware. From my perspective, as I think about the growth of PRC military capabilities, I think there's three things that concern me about it that I would just highlight for you. First and foremost is that this growth is being conducted under the auspices of a well-integrated long-term strategy. Many of you have probably heard about this strategy of military civil fusion that attempts to fuse economic and social development with security strategies for China, that results in this integrated national strategic system that really is designed to rejuvenate many of their capabilities and move them to a place where they have not been before. And this has been something that has been underway for a long period of time. I visited China in 2006, and I can remember the discussions we had out at the Chinese War College about some of the capabilities they were pursuing. And it didn't necessarily occur to me, it may have occurred to others here, that all of this work that they've been doing has been under the guise of a long-term strategy that started out through their 5-year programs and now has really developed into a national strategy leading to 2049. So that's the first thing that concerns about this. They have a plan, and they are executing, and they're executing it well. Second thing I think that concerns me is their advanced technology development through this advanced defense, science, technology, and industrial system that they've been able to put together. So there has been a significant expansion of the Chinese private sector, particularly in their defense industrial base and their supply chains, and this has really benefited them in terms of developing capabilities much more faster at greater quantities than they have had in the past. To some extent, China has benefited a little bit by the latecomer advantage to some of these technologies. They've watched what others have done, they've copied it, and of course, we're all aware of what they're doing with intellectual property and other things like that to take advantage of that. But they have benefited from that particular approach. They have been very consistent in the spending on defense items. While it doesn't necessarily rival ours, it has been consistently in the 1.2 to 1.4% of their GDP for years, and this level of consistency has served them well. They're investing in emerging technologies that are designed to increase the speed of warfare, and have really focused in on this idea of intelligentized approach here, which basically means that they are focused on emerging and disruptive technologies like AI, and this has really been an area in which they've focused on. So we've seen specific focus in as I mentioned, in artificial intelligence and advanced robotics, semiconductor and advanced computing are areas where they are doing this. Quantum technologies, biotechnology, we've seen this. Hypersonics, and again, I think we're all tracking this, and this has come to a head with hypersonic space weapons that can be nuclearized, and other directed energy weapons, and of course some of the advanced materials and alternative energy approaches that they are taking. So the second concern is this focus on advanced technology and how they've been able to leverage virtually their whole society in their private sector to do this. And the third concern, I think, is the sense of urgency. Last year, the Chinese Communist Party announced a milestone for the People's Liberation Army modernization by 2027. That is broadly understood as trying to get modernized into a system of capabilities that will frankly provide them more credible options for Taiwan contingency or other things. So, this is the third piece. They are not only have a plan, but they're pursuing technology, but they have a real sense of urgency in terms of doing it. And those three things, I think, James, are what are really giving me concern about the PRC military growth that we're seeing.
Thanks for that, and for pointing out kind of the comprehensive nature of what the PRC is doing on the military front, and certainly the civil military fusion, which is very important to how they do business. You mentioned sort of in passing nuclear issues. I wanted to kind of pick that up a little bit, and for a long time, PRC has been kind of a distant player on the nuclear scene. They first developed an atomic capacity back in the 1960s, well after the United States and then the Soviet Union. And then for several decades, they have kept a kind of their number of nuclear weapons at a fairly low level. But recently, that seems that is changing. And we have, it's public knowledge. The Pentagon has noted what it sees as the intent of Beijing to at least double the number of nuclear warheads in the next few years. And then there are press reports recently about us, finding additional missile fields in China, which raise kind of further questions about Chinese intentions. And this is also, against the backdrop of the United States and Russia sort of reducing their nuclear forces in alignment with existing treaties. So you have this circumstance where the PRC, which is not currently bound by any strategic arms control treaties, increasing the number of forces, and makes for a potentially complicated world going forward. And would welcome your thoughts on that, and in particular, whether you think these developments would possibly confer upon the PRC any advantages in future crises.
Yeah, I think this is, again, another area to have some significant concerns about. And I think the suggestion and most of the reading I've done and other things that we've all heard about here is that there is some suggestion that China maybe is likely moving away from what has been referred to as kind of a minimum deterrent strategy with their nuclear capacity towards something that would suggest another approach, whether it's preemptive strike or maybe an escalate to win strategy, where they have a greater capacity, and so that plays a greater weight kind of the strategic angling that they're involved in. So as you suggested, there's accelerating large scale expansion of the nuclear forces and building a more diversified arsenal. There are significant infrastructure investments in missile silos, somewhere on the order of about 800 is what I've read here. They are building a DF-41 intercontinental ballistic missile that can carry 6 to 10 warheads. Obviously, that puts them into the realm of modern nuclear technology. They are producing at a what I would describe as kind of a lower rate than we have seen with perhaps the United States at the time when we were producing these at a much greater rate. But they have been consistent in this, and they are aiming for about 1,000 warheads by 2030, is what it appears. They have an aggressive testing and modernization program. It's supported by the ability to generate more nuclear fuel production for warheads and beyond 1,000, frankly. And then, of course, is augmented with the capability of 6, ballistic nuclear submarines that certainly could hold the United States or others at risk here as part of this. So the impact here, I think, is that China may actually be developing a true nuclear capability that could alter our options and opportunities during crisis periods. I think it goes without saying that the nuclear capabilities well established on the table will change the nature of how we look at things. And with China developing capabilities that could potentially hold the United States and its allies at risk, I think it definitely can change the strategic equation as we look through the resolution of emerging crisis situations in the region.
Thank you for those insights. And having covered at least to some extent the kind of the nature of PRC military developments, ranging from the unconventional to the conventional to include the nuclear developments, I wanted to sort of get your sense of what we should be doing in response. As most people are aware that we've been involved in the Pacific for decades. I mean, the United States is a maritime power, is a Pacific power. We're also a European power, and we've had troops deployed overseas at bases and in Okinawa, and mainland Japan, and Korea, and elsewhere. We have treaty commitments with South Korea, with Japan, with the Philippines. We do a lot of things with Australia. So we're already there, right? And we've been there for decades. But what are some of in that context, what are some of the kind of the military capabilities that you see as most important for us to develop going forward? With an eye towards strengthening deterrence, right? Because nobody wants a conflict. But also if deterrence should fail, then we want to have the right capabilities to achieve our objectives. So your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, certainly. So, first and foremost, I think it's really important that before we talk about specific capabilities and things like that, is to recognize that in the Pacific, like we have in Europe, we do need a Pacific deterrence initiative that's fully supported, fully funded, that helps us look at force design and posture, that talks about exercises, experimentation, and innovation, that addresses the lethality and capabilities of our forces, and then looks at how we strengthen alliances and partnerships throughout the region. So it isn't a function of just the services and SOCOM developing capabilities. It's making sure that those capabilities are really wrapped into a broader Pacific defense initiative that I think is really, really important. But getting Moving to the capabilities, again, I think if you talk to any of the services, I know if you talk to the service from which I come from, the U.S. Army, they'll lay out 30 plus 4 different initiatives that they are. So they have definitely thought through the capabilities that they need, and I suspect you probably get that from all of the services. But from my perspective, I would just share a few broad areas of capabilities we ought to be thinking about. First of all, to our previous discussion, we ought to be looking at modernizing our nuclear capacity, and not just our own missiles and warheads and stuff like that, but all the modern command and control and everything else that is needed to do that. Second of all, I think there has to be investments and focus on space and cyberspace capabilities. It is in these functional areas where we have to be able to dominate in a potential conflict against China, and so we've got to look at making sure this area is addressed in our investments. There has been a lot of discussion and a lot of work going on in the Department of Defense related to command control, communications, ISR. Many of you have heard of the JADC2 concept, the Joint All-Domain Command and Control, designed to pull all of our systems and capabilities together. This, I think, is extraordinarily important. I think there is progress being made on this. Each of the services I know has different approaches that they're taking to this. I've been most familiar with what the Army has been doing in terms of this. But this command and control aspect and tying things together to include information and all of our collection capabilities with our strike capabilities, I think, is extraordinarily important in a conflict with China where things will probably move very, very fast. Certainly missile defense, joint lethality. And that's not just better weapon systems, but it's also the better mobility systems and better integration of those systems as we move forward is an important area. Advanced autonomous systems, and then of course resilient and agile logistics are going to be really, really, really important in a conflict in the Pacific, where we've got to be able to take care of our own forces at the same time as we've got to protect our own supply lines back to the country here. So that is going to be particularly important.
Thank you for that, and especially kind of noting the different capabilities and different strengths of services, and trying to kind of knit this together in a larger concept, the joint force, so that the sum is greater than the parts. Maybe you could say expand a little bit on long range fires, perhaps from the Army perspective. I mean, the backdrop here is it seems to me we have been playing sort of catch up, and part of that has to do with a treaty we had in a different theater, right? We were party to the 1987 INF treaty with the then Soviet Union, and that carried over to the treaty we endured with Russia. And then in the context of the past several years, it became unfortunately very clear that the Russians were not abiding by that agreement. And that, long story short, ultimately led to the United States withdrawing from that treaty under the previous administration. And what that treaty did is, we were party to it. We abided by that agreement. But China was not a part of that agreement at all. So China was able to develop over the last couple of decades an increasing number of theater ballistic missiles, long-range missiles. Some of them that can range. They do have intercontinental ballistic missiles, but they have a large number of regional missiles that can touch some of our bases and those of our allies in the Indo-Pacific region. So in that context, there's been a fairly recent effort by the services, and in particular the United States Army, to develop their own capabilities. So if you could speak to that, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's exactly right. And this is in many ways, as you suggest, China has benefited from this developing nation status that they've had for a number of years here, to pursue a variety of these capabilities. And of course, as you look at things like the first island chain, the second island chain, and how they've created this, tried to create this area of sanctuary around them, they've actually created an amount of strategic depth for themselves here, operating in the Indo-Pacific region. So the importance for U.S. defense capabilities is the ability to actually strike in there and hold them at risk in their own area. And this, of course, becomes the focus of kind of the joint long range fires. The Army has had a number of systems for years that have focused on this. Some of them not necessarily at the ranges that we need right now, but certainly looking to increase that. The hypersonics, the ability to move quickly at this. The Army has, while I know all the services are doing something, and again, I'm a little partial to the Army, I think the Army has stepped out and taken the lead in some of the hypersonic capabilities as we move through this. But again, this will be very, very important, and the ability to deliver fires quickly in areas where that really matter to the Chinese will be important in helping control escalation of a potential conflict. It will be very, very important to hold their capabilities at risk and to ensure that they absorb a level of punishment and strike capacity here that provides opportunities to potentially off-ramp conflict. So these long-range fires, I think, are extraordinarily important. And of course, the challenge in the Pacific is great, just because it's so big. Second of all, it's a maritime environment, and so you've got to look at islands, you've got to look at ships, you've got to look at aerial platforms. You've got to look at a variety of things for how we deliver these types of capabilities.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning the or alluding to the tyranny of distance in the Pacific. It's really something that is going back to World War II. It's a tremendous consideration in prosecuting those campaigns, and as we think about deterrence now and what we may have to do in the future, time, space, distance calculations matter greatly. In the context of the theater, maybe that's a good kind of segue into pulsing your thoughts on some of our allies and our partners. I mean, they're there. We, in varying degrees, different countries, we have, in some cases, mutual defense agreements. In other cases, we have kind of partnership agreements with countries that generally align with us. They have their own sovereign interests, of course, and they freely associate with us. It would seem to me that when we kind of step back and we look at kind of PRC advantages and strengths that the United States has, one of the great strengths that we have are precisely those allies and partners. They provide us depth. They provide us access. They have forces that in some ways can be complementary and can be helpful in certain scenarios. So maybe you could share your thoughts on allies and partners, and maybe highlight the contributions of a couple of the major ones, and relatedly, any thoughts on what more they can and should be doing in this context.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we're talking about this. I think this is an extraordinarily important area, and this is an area where, in terms of strengthening alliances and partnerships, this is not strictly the domain of the military. This is a place where you can bring all instruments of statecraft to really bear here with this, and so it's a critically important area. And I guess the first thing I would just say is I mentioned up front the importance of kind of having like a Pacific deterrence initiative, and one of the components of that, where we tie everything together, our own capabilities and things that we do into a cogent, coherent approach. But one of the pillars of that, of course, is going to be strengthening alliances and partnerships. And when you think about the countries that we have to work with in this area, there's a lot of them. And as you suggest, this is a game-changing advantage for us to have a long list of partners who share our interests and want to be aligned with the United States and all of its partners as we address these types of threats here. But certainly Japan, Australia, the Republic of Korea, these are all really top tier partners in the area. And then you've got the Philippines, New Zealand, again, a Five Eyes country, again, top tier. And then you've got emerging countries like Vietnam that have the capacity to do more, particularly in their own particular areas. So we have to do more. It might interest your students and others on here. Vietnam, for example, sends an incredible amount of people to our schools here in the United States, military technical schools, to learn tradecraft, to learn skills that they can take back. So these are great investments that we should be making. And when you look at the amount of funding that we put into these types of programs, dollar for dollar, this is really some of the best investments we can make, is getting our partners into our schools and helping develop leadership and develop their own technical capabilities. So I think that's the kind of the first area that we need to look at on this. But with respect to allies and partners, they definitely play a role in helping with deterring PRC aggression and helping with this. I think for us, it's important to make sure that our partners are taking the threats seriously. I think in the examples of the countries that I just cited for you, I think they all are. It is important for all of them to look at their own internal resilience here in this particular area. And this, I think, has to be a first responsibility of all of our partners, is that they have to look after their own capabilities and their own protection in their immediate areas, and not rely on the United States or a broader coalition to come in and secure them. That we want them to be in a position where they are securing themselves and also contributing to this. So they have to take responsibility for their own internal security issues. But also, I think it's important that we, through our security cooperation programs, that we encourage these partners to pursue sustainable and employable capabilities that they have. There is oftentimes the eyes get bigger than the stomach here in terms of some of the capabilities that our partners want, because they are flashy, they're capable, they're cutting edge, and that's really important. But I think what you learn over time is that while you want your partners to have the very, very best capabilities, what's really important is their ability to sustain, keep those things updated, and in a fighting capacity as we move forward. So I think an important thing that we have to do from our standpoint, and our partners have to be very realistic about the capabilities they're bringing on board, and then their abilities to support that. Certainly, some of these partners, we're all tracking kind of the recent sub agreements with Australia and other things like this. These are obviously very high end capabilities. So partners like Australia that got great depth, that have great capability, have extraordinary reach, are already supporting us in other areas of the world. Really play key roles in this, and we have to recognize their ability to bring people along and to play leadership roles in this as well. And I think this is a particularly important area for countries like Australia.
And I'm glad you mentioned security cooperation, because that is just a tremendous kind of range of things that we do to help allies and partners. I had a good fortune working in the Pentagon with General Hooper, who at that time led the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, and he did just such a tremendous job. Security cooperation does involve weapons sales, but it also involves so much more. And as you alluded to, professional military education exchanges and training and exercises and simulations with our partners, and also being very thoughtful about those weapons that we do sell. I mean, as you suggested, sometimes there is a desire from allies and partners to get the flashiest items, when those flashy items may not be the most appropriate for the circumstances. So maybe in that context, you could say a few words about Taiwan, and which has been in the news a lot recently, with the PRC, of course, having a longstanding claims, believing that Taiwan is simply part of China, and not renouncing the potential for using force at some point to reunify, and they have been doing a lot of things to kind of politically coerce Taiwan and the diplomatic space, and also as well with incursions into to airspace and naval deployments and all the rest. And Taiwan is a small island compared to mainland Japan, and it has a certain geography to it. It's about 100 miles off the coast. We've been encouraging Taiwan to strengthen its defensive capabilities for years. The United States abides by its the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act. Would welcome your thoughts on sort of going forward. What are some of the additional capabilities that we should be encouraging the Taiwanese to develop, and capabilities that we can actually assist them with?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I note that there have been some recent reports of U.S. Special Operations forces on the ground doing some advising and assisting. So I certainly think things like that are important. I was actually gratified to kind of hear that. But I think overall, it's really important for the United States just to continue to be a good partner and be faithful to our current policies and agreements, as you just cited several of them. And it's important for us to publicly and regularly communicate that. I know there's always discussions about whether we ought to change our approach or change some of our strategies or policies, and certainly those are discussions that can take place. But in the meantime, it is important for us, I think, to continue to be faithful to the current policies and agreements we have in place. I think it's also important, and again, in the realm of tough love here, and in having hard and courageous discussions with the Taiwanese. It's also important, I think, to put some pressure on them to take their own security seriously. This I think goes without saying. They have to care about this certainly as much as we do, and hopefully more than the United States does in terms of doing this. So I think in terms of some capabilities, upgrading their air and missile defense systems, I think should be a priority here. I think raising the readiness of their reserve forces and all their forces, and creating a strong national will for self-defense and resilience, I think is really, really important. There are military tasks within that, and there are, I think, leadership informational tasks within that as well. It's important that you can't put for a small island like Taiwan, put all of this on the backbone of their military. It's got to be the whole population has got to be into this, and so there does have to be an aspect of so-called national will there with them for their own defense. I think we have to look at their own power projection capabilities within the island itself. As you cited, this is fairly, it's an island 100 miles off the coast of China, but it has its own complex terrain as well. And so their ability to move forces around and be capable within their own confines, I think, is an important aspect of this as well. To have well-rehearsed plans for how they get forces to where they need to be, and to get their capabilities in the areas where they can be most useful. And I think perhaps finally, and perhaps most importantly, is really, I think, to encourage Taiwan to be very, very clear about their defense concept, and to actually, create some level of internal cohesion around this and support to it. Um, Many of you who have studied this are aware of the discussion. There are a couple different approaches here. The approach I think I would subscribe to, and that I would think would be best for an island like Taiwan, is this idea of the kind of the porcupine strategy, the idea of bristling with capability and making it so difficult for China to come in and do what they would need to do in trying to take over this, is kind of the idea behind this. An alternative approach to strategy, this would be one that, focuses on sea control, that focuses on air security, that focuses on long-range strike against Chinese forces. And while I think that could be enticing to some people, I think that fails to take advantage of the natural defense capabilities that an island, with 100 miles of water in front of it has. And so this idea of a strong internal defense and really making it difficult for China to come in and take that over using their military capabilities, I think is perhaps a more appropriate strategy, at least from my standpoint. I think it's important that the Taiwanese have to agree to this, and there has to be leadership in place that does understand the strategic concept and is not only developing the capabilities for it, but is also informing the population and their own leadership about this. So the idea of a coherent defense strategy for Taiwan, I think, is as important as the capabilities, having the capabilities to defend themselves going forward. So, I think there's certainly some things that they have to have. There's some things we have to do to help them, sharing our own expertise, our own experience, and giving them the confidence that there's partners with them, but also making sure that this is all done under the guise of a coherent defense strategy for Taiwan.
Thank you for those insights. And one of the debates which has been percolating for a long time is whether the United States should continue with a policy of kind of strategic ambiguity in the event of a PRC attack against the island. As noted earlier, we are required by law, the Taiwan Relations Act, to supply them with defensive weapons and services. But it's kind of silent on the question of what we would actually do in the event of a conflict. In a different theater, in the European theater, we have NATO. And NATO has an Article 5 security guarantee, right? The Three Musketeers, all for one for all. And that does say we are going to come and we are going to engage and defend our allies in the event of aggression. The question with respect to Taiwan is whether we're now at a point, or maybe soon will be at a point, where a sort of a clearer expression of what the U.S. would be willing to do in the event of a conflict would in fact be helpful for deterrent purposes. Now, there's some who would argue, kind of from a different point of view, that maybe that would be unwise, and maybe that would be provocative, and maybe that would encourage the very thing that we want to prevent. But I'm just curious about your opinion on this issue.
Yeah, no, in reading about all this, I'm certainly aware that there are obviously some different approaches to this. I think reasonable people can agree or disagree on kind of the policy that the United States should be taking here. And I guess my view on this is, as a combatant commander operating clearly in other areas, is that I think we shouldn't shy away from looking at policy changes and looking at that. But I do think policy changes that we make, particularly, of this gravity right here, ought to be very, very deliberate in terms of how we do it. So I think there has to be a lot of consideration about how we do this, and it shouldn't be a policy change that we move into very, very quickly. To answer your question more directly, I think we should stay with our current policy right now. My view is I think this it supports maintaining kind of a peaceful status quo right now, and it keeps us communicating with China and Taiwan at the same time. And I think this is really important. My military experience is that I do think you benefit from being able to talk to your competitors, being able to talk to your adversaries, and so I favor approaches that policy choices that actually support that kind of approach. Ambiguity, strategic ambiguity, isn't necessarily about whether we would intervene. I think it's the ambiguity about the conditions under which we would do that. And I do think that does support our deterrence approach here right now with this, is that not being publicly clear about what we would do and under the conditions in which we would do it. I think it does give China the opportunity for some pause in terms of this.
Okay. I want to ask you one more question and then turn to some of the questions that are beginning to flow in from our attendees. So the last question I have for you is maybe you could say a few more words about the role of SOF, Special Operation Forces, in the Indo-Pacific theater. I mean, we talked earlier about kind of the tyranny of the distance, and the use and employment of SOF forces is different than conventional forces, and often involves kind of a small number of forces that can pack a big punch. But given your experience as a former commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, how do you see sort of the United States position to use its SOF forces and perhaps cooperate with the SOF forces of some of our allies and partners?
Yeah, sure. So I definitely think SOF certainly has a role to play here. Certainly in the broad area of capacity building, in the area of foreign internal defense, helping optimize the capabilities and systems and processes that our partners have in place, so that they can defend themselves and they can contribute to a broader effort. I think is really important. And SOF forces, this is a strength of SOF forces. In the area of combating terrorism is another area. Now, this, I think, more of an indirect thing. I think this is something that, helping in this particular area, I think helps expose our capabilities and more importantly, our people to our partners out there, and it gives them something that is useful to them as well. I've heard it. When you talk about great power competition, I've heard it said that the combating terrorism is a contributing aspect to great power competition. That helping our partners address this is a way to strengthen our own influence. Advising and assisting, as we talked about, are really important. I don't think it should be lost on anybody that the United States military, all services, all ranks, enlisted and officer, and to include our most senior leaders, have the ability to draw on decades of combat experience, and that type of experience, that type of sharing with our partners, is I think very, very helpful, and in particular in the SOF area. The SOF community has led in things like targeting and in employment of surveillance capabilities and all the principles that come behind that, and these are areas where we can really help. CENTCOM has made extraordinary investments in information operations over a number of years now, and it is even since I left there in 2016, it has moved miles beyond where it was, and is a very effective integrator and orchestrator of information operations in there. And this is an area where they could help as well. And I would tell you one final area where I think the SOF could help in particular is we shouldn't forget about the kind of the historic role of SOF as an economy of force to operate in other areas, while we concentrate conventional forces in main areas like the Indo-Pacific. So the ability of SOF, because of their multiplying effect, the ability to put small teams on the ground, work with larger groups of partners, really provides a unique economy of force capability for the broader Department of Defense capacity. I would just add one final thing on this, James, and this kind of goes into this area of the gray zone, which I think is a really important aspect of how we approach China. And I do think we need an approach that highlights how aggression by China in the Pacific could jeopardize their activities globally. When you look at China and the Belt and Road initiatives, this is all driven by their economic objectives, and so being able through SOF or other capabilities to hold them at risk in other areas, I think is got to be part of an effective strategy for checking their aggression in the Indo-Pacific region as well. And I think we certainly have the capacity to do that in a sustainable way while we continue to position and employ the majority of our forces in the Indo-Pacific.
And that leads very nicely into one of our first questions from our attendees. We've been talking for largely in the Indo-Pacific theater so far, and I think most people would agree that the PRC definitely presents challenges and a threat in that context. But you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, and the question is really, the extent we should be concerned about China on a global scale beyond just the Indo-Pacific region. Things that they're doing and interests that they have in the Middle East and in Europe and even South America. To what extent you are concerned about these activities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we would be making a significant mistake if we didn't look at our competition or the threat of China on a global aspect. I mean, just if you look at things like rare earth materials, for example, the investments they have made in places like Africa, and to some extent in Afghanistan, where they're again another country that is rich with this, unfortunately not able to take advantage of that. China's focus on this long-term focus on trying to secure resources out here in areas other than the Indo-Pacific, I think is an extraordinary aspect of their overall approach, and it is I think Exhibit A in terms of why we need to pay attention on a global scale to what China is doing. To answer your question or the asker's question more directly, yeah, I am very concerned about Belt and Road Initiative. When in the area that I last operated in the CENTCOM area of responsibility, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, that ran essentially bisected Pakistan from north to south, and dumped into the Red Sea, and then was connected to ports that they were pursuing, and not only in the Horn of Africa, but actually in the Arabian Gulf. I think really poses a significant challenge to us long term, and could have some big impact. In the time that I was the CENTCOM commander from 2016 to 2019, we went from periodic presence of Chinese naval vessels in the waters of the Middle East to persistent presence of Chinese vessels and with the single purpose of securing their own supply lines and the Belt and Road Initiative. So Belt and Road effort. So I think this is really, really, really important. And by the way, these things are not helping our partners out there. There's numerous examples of buyer's remorse with China and the investments that they made in these countries, and what that is, the economic situation and the security burden that's in place on a lot of these these countries that would naturally be aligned with us.
Thank you. And this discussion leads into the next question from one of our attendees, is taking this to kind of a global level. And the question has to do with potential collusion between the PRC and the Russian Federation. As we all know, there's seems to be a brewing crisis right now, and with the Ukraine and the Russian Federation, and more broadly, there's discussion of exercises between the PRC and the Russian Federation, military exercises. I think legitimate debate about how substantive and how extensive those exercises are, but nonetheless, some have taken place over recent years. But broadly speaking, to what extent are you concerned about any sort of coordinated efforts between Beijing and Moscow? Given the fact that they do seem to be a sort of a common anti-West and common anti-U.S. perspective, but at the same time, it seemed to me that there's also some historical baggage between those powers. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, certainly I think this is a reason for concern. I know, my former boss, Secretary Jim Mattis, used to talk about this all the time, about the importance of making sure that we tried to prevent a closer alignment between Russia and China. And I think if you look at both of those actors, they both have different strategic objectives. As we kind of talked about, China is principally economically motivated in terms of what they're trying to do, and trying to create the Great China here by 2049, and they've got a very solid plan to do that. It is really dependent on making sure resources and then everything all kind of comes back to China to continue to power their economic dream and where they want to go. Russia's approach is, I think, their strategic objectives, I think, are a little bit different, obviously, than that. I think they are very keen to undermine us. They're keen to use capabilities like information warfare and cyber capabilities and other things to weaken NATO, weaken our alliances, weaken the position of the United States in areas where we are deployed. And so I think when you look at any kind of coming together of both of these capabilities, where both of these approaches, as disparate as they are, could conceivably come into a overall cooperative strategy against us. I think that's got to be sending up red star clusters for all of us. So I think it's something to be concerned about. Both countries have their own challenges. Certainly, Russia has some significant challenges economically and with a variety of other things here. They don't have many partners beyond themselves with this, and so that works against them a little bit. But I do think we have to be concerned about these two elements coming together, particularly going back to the nuclear thing we talked about. I mean, this could be very, very significant for us. Thank you.
And we're running out of time, but we have a couple more minutes to try to squeeze in a couple of those attendee questions. And another one has to do with some of the other instruments of national power that could be used in the competition with China. And I know you brought up earlier kind of diplomatic power and working with State Department. We've talked about collaborating and cooperating with allies and partners. What are some of the sort of other instruments of national power that you think can be helpful in terms of deterring the PRC from different forms of aggression?
Yeah, I think we need to put much more effort into our informational capabilities, our informational power, the power of ideas. If you look back at during the Cold War, we had a very well-developed information capability that could respond with great agility, with greater flexibility to the things that the Soviets were doing, and it allowed us to be dominant in the information realm. And I think that this is really, really important. I know there's been efforts by the Department of State and others to reconstitute some of these things, and that's good, and I applaud those things. But I think we've got a ways to go in this, and we have to be dominant with our information power. The power of ideas, I think, have to be persuasive. Out there. I would just share two other thoughts with you here, James. I personally believe one of the most important things we could do is get our ambassadors in place in countries in the Indo-Pacific region, and really in a variety of other places around the world. I think we have been hobbled with this, and I know there are a variety of reasons for this. Some going back to the administration, some to Congress, and I'm sure there's probably some other things that I'm not aware of. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going to compete, the first task in competing is you got to show up, and we've got to put our first team forward. And I say that, and I don't want to cast any dispersions on charges or the excellent diplomatic corps officers that we have out in our embassies globally. They are extraordinary. Americans are doing, yeoman's work on behalf of the nation. But the fact of the matter is, we've got to get ambassadors out there, and I think it is one of the most important things that we can do to begin to change the game out there, and then make sure our Department of State has got all the back support that it requires in the offices there. And then I would just I would maybe close this one with this comment, and I say this really as the president and CEO of Business Executives for National Security, is we need to look at ways that we leverage the private sector in our strategic competition. I talk to business executives all the time across the country. They get what's at stake here, and we need to look at how we leverage our business capacity to help with national security. This is not new to us. If you look at the Marshall Plan was actually, it wasn't led by the military or even by the Department of State. It was led by the business community. It was business leadership that went in and helped address, help rebuild our former adversaries in Europe and out in the Pacific and in Japan. And so we've got to look at ways that we improve that. And this is a big focus area for us at BENS here, how we try to do that. But I think these are areas we have to pay attention to.
Thank you for those insights, and I think it's especially important. And I agree with you completely about the need for integrating those different elements of national power. When we think about the PRC and its developments, it can appear very menacing. But when we step back and we think about the strengths that we have had and how we have employed these different instruments of national power historically, and the number of allies and partners. And the confidence in our own ideas, we have some reasons to be optimistic here going forward. General, thank you. And what a wonderful treat for IWP and our attendees to hear your thoughts and for you to share your expertise with us here tonight. It's been highly informative, and thank you sincerely for devoting your time this evening. I'd also like to thank all of those who tuned in, either via Facebook or Zoom. And if you're interested in attending additional webinars, please check out our website, or perhaps supporting IWP, or even applying to one of our many programs. We would invite you to visit our website at iwp.edu. With that, again, General, thank you, and I wish everybody a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thanks. Great to be with you.